Jade, I know, right?
I'm sorry, please don't hold that against her.
Not yet.
Give me just a little bit of time and you will.
What I find ultimately the most fascinating for me as someone who spends his life living other lives, that's what I do for a living, is having the foresight to lean on your community and make it a community event. Lindbergh had a gigantic plane with what, 400 gallons of fuel. You could just get in the air and fly. So they came up with the Gold Book, which is the air version of the Green Book. And they had to figure out where to land, where it was safe. So once you land there, we don't know if we're moving forward. We don't have any money. So if you're giving us somewhere to stay, food, lodging, gasoline, pistons, you get to sign the wings and the community gets to come and fly with you. And that to me is kind of the most beautiful part of the story.
And when they drew it out, what they drew out was where they could land, where the Black towns were, where they could land safely. Because every time when we're reading about banning, we find some of these articles, we'll also find a list of the lynchings. You know, so this wasn't minor. This was major for them to go to safe places and land in safe places, which is what, thank goodness they managed to do. Now this is, oh wait, let me go back. This went a little too fast. All right, so Banning went from Faber High School to here, where he decides he's going to go to college. And that's what he did right here in this town. And then when he ran out of money and didn't have any more money, he actually opened his own Banning Auto Company. And that is right down your street. Isn't that kind of amazing? And we found the sign that Banning had, which is why I got put in the book. And one of the other things I think is fascinating, Fisher, who by the way is from Iowa as well, Banning wrote to Chicago. He wrote everywhere, please teach me to fly. Please teach me to fly. I'm going to learn to fly. It's what I want to do. It's what I have to do. And everyone said no. And then one day a man walked into his repair shop with a motorcycle. This is what we believe happened. And Banning noticed that he had wings on his jacket and said, would you teach me to fly? And the man said, yes. I'm going to teach you on the sly. Banning joked later that it couldn't be too much on the sly because he was Black and it's not like people wouldn't know, but everybody was air-minded and that's all they really cared about. And so he managed to learn to fly. And I think it was one of the saddest things is the day that Fisher died. And we actually found the articles where Banning talked about that and what that meant to him, because he did not have his pilot's license yet. He had to do his solo hours. You want to talk about the Grand Plan?
No.
Okay. So Banning decides, you know, I'm going to do something that nobody else would do. I'm going to build my own plane. Would you build your own car to learn to drive? No, we wouldn't do it. Most of us would not do it. That rare individual that's going to find a way to fly no matter what, they would do it. So he actually took the engine from the crashed plane that Fisher was in and used that to build his plane around it. And one of the things I tell kids all the time when I talk to them, there's one reason he was able to do that, and that is because he could read. His mother was a teacher. She taught all the local children, and he could read. So he could actually take that manual and figure out what he needed to do to put that plane together, to build his dream. And that's what we all need to be doing, right, in our lives, is building our dreams. And that's what he did.
No. Working on the play that we've built around this, for me, has been very important in terms of teaching children to create their own agency. And oftentimes, yes, no means no, means no, means no, means no. But this is a very great example of literally just creating your own agency. We use science in the play to have the kids help us figure out where we're going to go, how much gas we need, what town we're going to live in. And they become so invested in this entire journey without understanding that this is a mirrored journey for their own experience moving forward. The play is going to end. The book will be on the shelf, but those lessons are oftentimes what we don't teach kids. You put them in the thing, you put them in the class, you regurgitate the words, you get the grade and you move forward. But there's something about creating your own agency that Banning, to me, is sort of the epitome of. They decided to do something impossible. They just figured out how to do it. It wasn't going to go necessarily that well, but they figured out how to do it. And I find with our youth today, it's so easy for them to see and have things, right? Or to find an answer, or to look up a thing and the answer is there, as opposed to, can you take it upon yourself to build your own answer? And so when we work on these plays and when we travel through different schools, you sort of see their eyes open and light up in terms of, yeah, I have these tools. I can do this. I can do actually anything I want, when they're in systems that deny them that, or don't tell them that, or don't give them an opportunity to grow and fail. And then failure is growth again, right? But at least tell them you have all the tools in front of you if you want to do anything. And that has really been the thrust of what is successful about the play that piggybacks this book.
So I'll just fill in a few gaps here. When Louisa mentioned the James Herman Banning auto repair shop, we're talking about at his parents' house over in the 900 block of 2nd Street, roughly where Hoist Printing is now. Unfortunately, the house is no longer there. So that might situate you a bit. And the other thing that really comes to mind here is that Banning was surrounded by other very ingenious individuals downtown here, those African-American students that he was living with. Among them, Jimmy Fraser was an auto mechanic. Jack Trice worked as an auto mechanic. There were a number of very mechanically oriented individuals that Banning knew. And so having that expertise was right at his fingertips, and yet it was so difficult to get into Iowa State and to be at a position where you were here in Ames instead of at whatever HBCU, historically Black college or university, you might have been able to go to. Right. So there were some opportunities along with the challenges.
Well, and it's interesting too, because one of the people that he roomed with was Frederick Douglass Patterson. Really? And Patterson, yeah, we went down to the Anacostia Museum. I should say Pat Smith went down to the Anacostia Museum and found in his manuscripts, in his original manuscripts, he writes about seeing the very first person he ever saw fly a plane, Black man, was in Ames, Iowa. And that happened to be Banning. So some of the actual inspiration for the Tuskegee Airmen was born right here in this town, which I think is amazing and fascinating. It didn't end up in the book because we couldn't really figure out how to do it, but it is one of the pieces of information we found that we really loved. So Banning gets his ground plane, and this he wrote "The Day I Sprouted Wings." And you can actually look that up online and read the article about the first time he ever flew. And it's really fascinating because he actually kept circling around the cow pasture that he got for, I think it was 25 cents or something that he got to use for every month. And he would just go circle around because he was afraid to take it up. He offered other people real money, $50 back in the day when $50 mattered. And everybody said no, because they were too scared too, because they helped build it. So and nobody trusts this thing. And so he, though, pulls back. He was going really fast. He got to the end of the field, pushed the throttle wide open. The full motor of the propeller propels him. And all of a sudden he's heading for the trees and he's going too fast to stop. And the only choice he had was to go straight up. And that's why he flew that day, was because he was going a little too fast and he couldn't stop. And he went right in the air and he wrote. That was the first time he felt free. He had sprouted wings. It's my favorite part of the story, to be honest, because I thought it's such a beautiful part. And he received his pilot's license number 1324, and he learned to barnstorm, which I think everybody knows. And then he went to California to work with our good friend William Powell and teach other Black men and women to fly. He was part of the Bessie Coleman Aero Club, named in honor of her after her passing. And that club didn't care if you were a man or a woman. They taught anyone who stepped through how to fly. And he was the vice president of that.
I also want to bring up the work of Floyd Cooper.
Yes.
And unfortunately, he's gone. We did do some time online where he would be talking to people and sketch for them while we were discussing the book. Floyd was a genius. What he did in terms of creating these images was not adding to a canvas. So he wasn't adding to a canvas. What he was doing, for the most part, was taking an eraser, like a sculptor, and removing color and light from the canvas in order to open the images, which is why they're so almost grand. He had a style of work that was not additive, but seemed reductive. But like a sculptor was chiseling away at a canvas with an eraser to open up the initial image before adding color. I had never seen anybody work like that. But he would look at a canvas, and while we were on the phone, he would just be talking and just working with this eraser, and you don't know what he's doing. And all of a sudden, these images would just fly off the page. So I've never seen another artist work in that way. He would start blank and then reduce and then add. And it adds a real dimension and depth to his canvas and all of his works.
And he was a fabulously generous illustrator, because he allowed us to talk to him, to actually say, no, Banning's forehead was not that slanted. And he would just laugh, because you're not supposed to talk to your illustrators. And he's like, okay, we'll fix it. He was really one of the most lovely men. So then Banning decided he was going to fly across the United States with somebody he really hated, Thomas Cox Allen. If you read, William Powell wrote a book. If you read the book that he wrote, it talks about Thomas Cox Allen. It talks about Banning. It talks about their relationship, and they did not like each other at all.
At all.
He thought Banning was a peacock. Banning thought he might be a little crazy. And because he was always complaining, always sure someone was trying to do something wrong. And so, but it just so happened that Thomas Cox Allen had $200 that he needed to get the Eagle Rock fixed so he could go up in the air. And Thomas Cox Allen wasn't a fool. He said, the only way you get this money is you let me fly with you. Can you imagine that moment where the person you like least in the world has offered you the money to have your dream? And yet they made a good team, because it was actually Allen who came up with the idea of the Gold Book. And then Allen, of course, this is in the book by our friend Powell. He said, gee, said Allen, we'll be just like hobos begging our way. And that's when Banning said, we're going to call ourselves the Flying Hobos. And that's what they did. I love the fact that everywhere they went, from Wink to Midland and on to Wichita Falls, Texas. You know, they would fly over things. The only reason they didn't go over the Rockies, can anybody guess what that is? Too high. Their plane couldn't do it. It
Not doing it.
it was a 14-year-old engine and most of the horses had died. So it was not going to get there. So,
Go around.
yep. And they'd fly and they'd land. They had 32 gallons in their tank. That's how many gallons they could put into it. They only had it fully filled one time on their whole flight. But the
Which is
point,
why we get the kids to help us figure out how to do it. How can we move on? How much gas do we need? What is that going to cost? Where's the safest place? And all of a sudden, they are part of the problem solving in terms of helping these two men achieve this task and become invested in terms of understanding what problem solving is in their own lives, and that nothing is insurmountable if you actually sit and problem solve. So that's part of my favorite part of this show that we do, is that the kids, they get really invested and they really want to help. But once they leave, you sort of see it on them once they leave the building. So it's a really great model to pour them into in terms of how to achieve something that it was told to them is not achievable.
one of the other things that happened when they left Columbus, when they were going to Columbus, the plane died and they are flying over farmland. They have no idea what's going to happen. And Alan, who wrote the manuscript that gave us all these details, who didn't love Banning, who really wished Banning, you know, that he would like to have been the star, right? That's what he wanted. But he actually said, Banning did turn the plane sideways, went between a barn and a haystack. Can you imagine that? I didn't even know how he did it. And then righted the plane and did a dead stick landing. He'd never seen anybody who could fly the way that man could fly. And he gave him full credit for it. It was, that's one of Banning's. The steel in our motor is so old, it's crystallized. 2 rocker arms went out, Banning said. And Banning had, you can tell by just some of his quotes, that he had a sense of humor. He was funny. And he also wrote 4 articles about this flight, which you could actually read in the Pittsburgh Courier as well, which I think are, and he was an amazing writer. And then 21 days with the help of 24 communities, 410 gallons of gas and $150 to fly 3,300 miles. They arrived.
She's like a Banning guy, I'm a Cox guy.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
I'm always standing up for Cox when we're doing the show, because I really do.
So
He
that's
does.
easier than Banning, having to ride across the country with him.
You know, he wasn't going, and really too, I've done this show in schools in West Virginia, all over. And a lot of educators are so happy when we talk about the fact that these guys had to put their minds together and cooperate, and how that is actually the key to making this happen. I don't like you, you don't like me, but our goal is common. So I'll come from this side, you come from that side, I'll bring my skill set, you bring your skill set. This is actually not a competition. And when I walk out of an auditorium, the kids have that. I feel like we kind of hit a mark in terms of having them understand that you're not going to like everybody, you're not going to love everybody, but you can achieve with additive principles something that's greater than the sum of the parts. So I do like the fact that the two of them didn't get along. And I do always stand up for Alan, because somebody has to.
He does. He does.
Somebody has to. So I really do. But the fact that they're coming at this from 2 different places and have a common goal and figured out how to do something insurmountable, I think is
Yeah.
amazing.
Okay.
Hold on just a second.
So I'm sitting here thinking, how did he reach out to the various communities where he ended up having to land in order to get refuel and move on. Because as you know, there were challenges
Yes.
in communication, no matter who you were, especially going into some of those areas. So was there any accounting of how they were able to reach out to the various communities once they got?
Once they started moving, the interesting part here, to Banning's credit and not Cox's, is that he was a very intelligent and eloquent writer. So we were not using modern technology and probably not using a lot of telephones, but the newspapers started to carry this stuff. And he would write in to the newspapers. And as that train of information started to happen, people started to see where they were, and people started to see, oh, they're probably close to us. And that was the propellant that added the people to, let's say, the struggle, right? But that added people to the journey. So by the time they started talking about people to the Gold Book, this was a thing that was a movement that they had propelled. And a lot of that had to do with Banning writing articles into the Black newspapers and informing them about, you know, the ups and downs of their journey and wanting people to be a part of what they
And
were doing.
they would do interviews. They also sent telegrams. So, you know, it turns out that Alan, when they flew into Oklahoma City, had told his mother they were coming at a certain time, and somehow the telegram got messed up. So she ended up there like at midnight waiting for them. And of course they weren't there because they didn't have headlights. They didn't even have lights on their plane. They couldn't fly at night. So they could send telegrams, the newspapers, they alerted that they were coming, and they had ways of communicating with each other, which is really, you know, remarkable. The African-American newspapers actually were just like the way that everything got pushed forward.
Yeah. It was the press.
Did you access the Iowa Bystander, which was an important Negro newspaper, the large circulation? And I wonder if Iowa State ever connected with them through that newspaper.
Actually, we couldn't find the articles with the Iowa Bystander, though we know they covered it. What we did find, though, was a number of articles that Banning wrote when he lived in Ames. One of them was what he thought was unfair practices towards the Negro, and he wrote about that, and he was very outspoken, which we thought that takes a lot of courage, you know, and in the 1920s and early 19, that takes a lot of courage, and yet he did and he did not mince his words. He didn't feel the need to, and he didn't. So, you know, yes, unfortunately though, if anybody ever finds a copy buried somewhere about what Iowa wrote, we would love to see
Let
it.
us know.
Yeah, we really would love that.
It's not completely surprising to hear that he was outspoken about the situation for African Americans in Ames or in Iowa. We had a number of very outspoken members of the Black community in Ames around that time who were happy to rock the boat and publish very eloquent articles in the local paper.
Right.
And so I can see him fitting in very well. And I believe Miss Edna Clinton just told me today that his name appears on the rolls of the NAACP here in Ames. So that is.
Oh, I would love a copy of that, just for
I would
our
too.
records.
You got
okay?
that, Miss Edna? You've got that.
I'm serious.
But there were a very strong set of people working together in the early decades of the 20th century here in Ames.
And the NAACP is one of the groups that they'd reach out to when they went to certain towns and that helped bring people together to hear them talk, because Banning would go and give a talk with Alan to help raise some funds.
What year was it?
1932.
32.
And do you recall when they landed? What day?
It was October 7th. Now I'm going to go back and look. It was October 9th, 1932.
So for Ames, the day October 8th is marked in commemoration of the passing of Jack Trice. And
Yeah.
so we have a tragedy followed by a triumph that we can embrace
Mhm.
here in our community, which I think is very special.
Well, in Banning, you know, the thing that's interesting about Ames, Iowa, that we felt very strongly when we visited a number of years ago, you know, doing the play, but also looking for information on him, is that Ames helped create him because they gave him support, which is something he might not have gotten somewhere else. And that's fascinating too. He was hoping on his last trip back, when he left New York and came back, that they would fly and stop in Ames. But it turned out they crashed the plane on their way back and there was no rebuilding it.
So you've mentioned quite a bit of your research. What was your favorite find in all of that research? What was that miracle that you grasped in your hand when you found it? You were
Thomas Cox Allen's manuscript. Pat calls me up on her cell phone in a dusty attic in a mouse-eaten box, right? It's his manuscript. Whose manuscript? Thomas Cox Allen's manuscript. What? What? It's his Pat, please talk just a little slower just for a minute. Is there a man in the box? No. I found his manuscript and she was crying. And she was like, what should I do? I said, they told you you could copy anything you want. So you just go to that copier and you copy everything, every single word. And one of, I think, the most important things we did was that we gathered up all this information, including about Banning's early life as well. And we took it to Lonnie Bunch, who was running the African American Museum at the Smithsonian. He was one of the researchers and he couldn't find the manuscript. He knew it was out there, didn't know where it was. And of course, how you're going to find it. Only Pat could have found it. She was like a honing pigeon. We couldn't figure out how she found it. But it was a beautiful thing to say, you were looking for this and hand all it over.
And what has happened with the Smithsonian since that time when it comes to Banning?
He's part of the Black Wings exhibit. We're hoping that he ends up in the African American Museum. I think that would just be exactly where he belongs, you know, because he helped build, you know, it was Eugene Bullard inspired Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman inspired Banning. Banning inspired the Tuskegee Airmen. I mean, it's just where they belong.
Kevin, what is your favorite aspect of either Banning or working on the play?
I really enjoy the fact that they did not feel that they would fail. And to carry that in adversity moving forward. I mean, the truth of the matter is they could have landed anywhere and this trip would have been over. There was no backers. There was nobody helping. They had to sort of do it on their own. By the grace of everything, that there was communities to help and support them. That to me is huge. I look around now after, you know, being here, I lived in LA during Rodney King and all of that stuff. And I lived in, and has since lived in New York. And I feel terrible for our youth in that they have such fractured sense of community. Nothing is connected. It's images, fake power, media, music, but nothing is actually connected. And in terms of, my older brother helped me do that. And he knew that because my uncle taught him, and he knew that because the guy down the street or the woman down the street taught him that. So there is less now a sense of a much more circular community. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm African. I grew up in Canada, but I was born in Africa, and then go to visit family. And I see that kind of community more often than not. You know, people are who they are. You can fight. There's this. some people are good, some people are bad, but there is much more of a sense that we are together. And that to me was the strongest part of this story. They're together. We don't like each other, but the larger lens says we are all of us here together and we are supporting you. And I feel that that is something that has been lost in the last 15, 20, 25 years. So we come to schools and perform, and there's almost sort of like a renewed sense that you get from these kids, like, oh yeah, it should be that way. We should be able to ask, lean on, fail without dying, get up, learn, move forward. So I always want to make sure that that is at the forefront of how we do it. And then the kids help us do it as well. And they don't realize that they've built their little community together in this auditorium to help us solve these problems. So it, you know, a big C community is something that we are tending to lack a lot now. Everything is very fractured and viewpoints are very myopic and very separate, when the power is actually when things are coming together. And I say to Louisa all the time, additive principles is my favorite scientific principle. When you have this, this, and this, and it comes together and it becomes greater than some of its parts. That is the kind of thing that we're trying to teach kids. And so that's my favorite part.
So we've got 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And I know we've got some additional questions out in the audience. Do you have anything else that you would like to cover before I open up the questions?
We did create a guide, an activity guide, and one of the things in the activity guide is a piece about asking them about collaboration. What do you do if you work with someone you don't like? How does that work? Because we do think that that's incredibly important. So that's there for anybody to use for free, however you want to use it. And in jameshermanbanning.com, there are 4 living history films. They're short. They're like anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes. So they fit in a classroom perfectly, or anything else you're doing. And that too is free for anybody to use any way they want to. And it shows 4 different scenes of Banning's life.
So great resources. I'll open this up for questions. Oh, you got that, Kathy? Thank you.
One of the things that makes, to me as an historian, this story that you're telling, this broad sweep in 1932, that the unemployment rate across the country is almost 24%. So I have a sneaking suspicion that the rooms were pretty well covered. The fuselage was pretty well covered. So I think this goes, you know, about community and people coming together around something that, for whatever reason, in September 1932, communities found incredibly compelling. Have a piece of that, even if it was only a quarter, we wanted to have a piece of it, which I think is very fascinating.
Hi, I was curious if you did any research on the people who signed the Gold Book.
Yes,
I think that'd
as
be
a matter of
interesting
fact,
to see.
as a matter of fact, Scully, his great granddaughter, he gave the most amount of money, filled up the fuel tank, and we met his granddaughter. So we have tried to look into various, we haven't gotten very far yet, but we've been looking into that because it is fascinating. Wouldn't you want to know that your great-great-grandparents or aunts or uncles helped make this flight happen?
And the Gold Book was lost, but we do
We have it.
have records of the people who signed the book and who gave. I don't know. I don't remember now if the records show what they gave,
Yes.
but we do have,
Yeah, they
but
do.
we do have a pretty accurate record of the people who participated.
Because I imagine there's probably impact stories there too.
It wouldn't have happened without those people, right? I mean, these 2 guys are amazing humans, but they needed to be held up in order to actually execute.
Do you happen to know what Banning was studying when he was at Iowa State?
I'm electrical engineering.
Electrical?
He
Smart
was, he
dude.
was only there for 1 year.
Yeah,
Is that right?
because he ran out of
Ran out of money.
but he actually had good grades because I looked. I wanted to make sure.
Banning fan.
You have a copy of the book here.
Um, they have copies of the book in the library, I believe.
The Sprouting Wings?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I
We
believe
have
so.
some here, yeah. Yes, we do.
Other questions? Oh, and I should acknowledge that we have James Herman Banning's great
Chris.
uncle, Christopher Hart, with us.
Yay!
Thank you. That's what I wanted to say. I wanted to offer my profoundest gratitude for all that you're doing to advance the story and let people know that things that when my brother and I were growing up, nobody would find out anywhere. So I wanted to give my profoundest gratitude as Phil's brother, helping. I mean, he did the lion's share, 98% of the work, but I just want to let you know how grateful I am that you're continuing it in the way that you are. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I just want to say, we went to Philip Hart and asked for permission to write the book. And he was like, sure. I'm not sure he actually thought we would, which is, but it really was wonderful because we did some interviews with him and collected some of the family lore that's so important to this. And the fact is, it's shocking to me that it was shocking to me at the time that people say nobody knew about Banning, but that's not true. Everyone in the African-American community knew. So it's not that nobody knew. Everyone in 1932 who was African-American knew. It's the fact that it wasn't in the mainstream papers. So that doesn't mean nobody knew. They did. It just didn't get passed down in our history books.
We went to
Way it should.
Embry-Riddle, the flight school in Florida, and F-16s everywhere, engineers everywhere. They have fake flight control stations. They're practicing all this stuff all day long with each other. And we performed there. I think we did 2 shows there, and there was no one on campus, professors or otherwise, who knew anything about this at our #1 flight school. So every time we keep poking at it, it adds to the momentum of it. So that is always enriching and rewarding and gives a chance to open other people's apertures in their minds. Mine's open. I'm seeing it. We're doing it already, but to be able to give that to other folks in a meaningful way is very special.
Well, and there were many people in the city of Ames at the time who knew Herman Banning very well, who took their cars and motorcycles to his auto shop. And if you watch some of the documentaries that have been made about early African-American flying, and I want to thank Philip Hart for pointing me toward them. I now have a large collection of these things. Flyers with a Dream, and On Black Wings. Those really fill in the missing parts of history that tell a wonderful story that more people should know about. And in one of them, and I can't remember which one, Farwell Brown from Ames is actually talking about knowing Herman Banning when he lived in Ames. So this part of our aviation history should be more a part of our Ames history. And that's one of the reasons that I requested that we rename the Ames Municipal Airport as James Herman Banning Ames Municipal Airport. And I want to thank the City Council for approving that measure. And I want to invite all of you out to the airport tomorrow for the dedication ceremony at 10 a.m., where you will hear remarks from Christopher Hart, and you will have an opportunity to see the new history wall at the airport that Discover Ames has put in with a small slice of our Ames aviation history focused on Herman Banning and other Ames aviators including Nita Snook, who taught Amelia Earhart how to fly. So it should be a wonderful day, and then everyone can come out to the Juneteenth activities from noon to 4:30 in Banshell Park. And this evening, if you are interested, you can come to Roosevelt Park for the Juneteenth film, which I think I can say the name of, because I'm in the Ames Public Library. We will be watching Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, and there will be an opportunity for photos with big head banning over there and some other opportunities as well to meet like-minded people who care about what happens in this community.
And tomorrow we'll be performing the play as well.
2:30.
2:30.
At
Yeah,
the
the
Banshell.
other two actors are getting some rest right now, but 2:30, they just flew in. But 2:30 tomorrow at the Banshell, we'll do a performance of this show.
Please bring children
Please.
and let your kids know, let your kids know, just bring kids, please.
I will say this, my grandson, when we were doing the filming of the little short videos, that are great. I mean, you really will love them. They star the two actors that you'll see tomorrow as well. But my grandson looked at me one day and he said, you know, Grandma, I'm a lot like Banning. And that was a moment that committed me completely to making this something that millions of kids can say, because if they see it, they can believe it. He was 6 years old, but he'd been running with a kite. So I think that's, I think that had a lot to do with it. But it really was, you know, you have to see it to believe it, to be inspired to do it. And that's really important.
And kids right now are lacking role models. And not that there aren't role models in their lives of value, but they are being taught to look for role models in the wrong places, or to look for temporary role models, or to look for media stars, et cetera, right? But earlier today, which I'm a little upset, but earlier today, coming in here, flying out of DC, was sort of accosted by somebody while I was trying to get through, what do you call it?
Security.
Get through security. And at first it was funny, I was joking about it, but all of a sudden it started to turn in a very particular way. And the guy decided that after patting me down and looking in my bags, now they were going to decide to test me for gunpowder or explosives or cocaine, like the tests that they do. And I had to firmly put my foot down and get really loud and use not great language, only because I've had role models in my life say, that's not acceptable. And you cannot accept that. So we want to be able to give kids tools. And I don't think that they get a lot of tools these days.
I want to thank all of you for joining us. I should check in. I believe we're at time now, or do we still have time for one more question if we've got?
You know, when I came to teach here, I started a Black History program on the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My principal allowed me to do that. And so throughout my 34 years, my students had an opportunity to learn a great deal. But like you said, I had to do research, go to multiple sources to find little snippets of information. Years later, a Reverend Bigsby came into Iowa and talked to us about a Black History Showdown competition, which really gave students an opportunity to learn about contribution of many African-Americans, early inventors and so forth. And it became a competition statewide. And we were very fortunate in my classroom that I got my 8th grade history teachers as well as Dwight Harrell at Meeker Elementary to also participate. And that lasted for several years. And we actually had a winning group to go to Atlanta to visit the King Center and everything as a result of that. So, but like you say, as a former teacher in social studies, you had to look way beyond your regular textbook if you wanted to introduce anything about the substance of Black Americans and their accomplishment in this country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? So how did you get into the work that you do?
I talked my way into McGill University in Canada, Ivy League school. I was going to be an attorney. I thought I wanted to work in international law and work at the UN. And then I just kind of looked around the room and I thought, this is really cool, but this is not where I belong. It just was such a clear thing. So I ended up moving to California, and I always made sure that even if I was working, and I started working young when I was still in college, but even if I was working in film or in television, et cetera, that I always made time to do other kinds of work and to do children's theater and use that for that. As opposed to trying to split a whole bunch of time. I said, let me use what I got over here and transfer it here. So I always try to create or to keep a balance in terms of that. And you know, you're an actor, kids see you in movies, they see you in TV, that's how they live, but I don't mind using that in order to kind of hit bigger goals with them. So if they think it's flashy and shiny and nice, that's great, but I'm going to use my time with them for deeper stuff. So when I do go to set and I'm working on a film, and I got a film coming out with the Obamas at the end of August or beginning of September, Rustin, about the March on Washington. And I'm playing the guy who created HUD. So if I'm doing that, it's not hollow because I know I'm doing this. And that's the only way to kind of mitigate the two, because you could be in all of this stuff and be in Lord of the Rings and this and that, but this is why you find people are so dissatisfied with their lives, or, you know, pick up a drug addiction or any of that stuff, because it's hollow. So you have to find your own way to really balance that. So I try to do that. I'm working on Radio Golf right now in DC, and I play Sterling, who was a character that's from 2 Trains Running. He robs a bank in 2 Trains Running. Now, this is 29 years later. He's back in the neighborhood in the Hill District in Pittsburgh as a guy who sort of fixes houses. But what you come to understand is that he's the everyman. Everything that comes out of his mouth is things that August heard on the street in Pittsburgh. So every time my character opens his mouth, heads just start nodding. So in a lot of ways, it's the same kind of work. So I always try to make sure that I'm balancing the two.
So I hope we can thank our guests for their wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Please join us for Juneteenth this evening and tomorrow, and out at the airport for the dedication ceremony. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really